Good morning. My name is Kelly Trombley Freitag, and I serve on your DuPage UU Church Board of Trustees. We want to welcome everyone this morning to our open and inclusive virtual community. As Unitarian Universalists, we hold that there are many spiritual paths to truth and meaning, and pledge to support one another as we explore these paths. We are so glad you were able to find us and join us for our live-streamed service today. Please check the church website at www.dupageuchurch.org for updates. If you search under DuPage UU Church on Facebook, you will find a number of ways to be in community with us as well. We would love for you to join us today at noon for Science Sunday. Join us on Zoom. The Zoom information for joining is in our weekly update. And a reminder that next Sunday, we will be all watching the GA service at 11 a.m., not 10:30. See also the newsletter or the weekly update for information on joining the GA service. Because of the change in service time, the Zoom coffee hour on that day, next Sunday, will happen at 10:30. And the information for joining that is in the weekly update. Thank you.
As we light the chalice on this Father's Day, let's recognize that the word Father is complicated. For some, it means loving care. For others, repressive hierarchy. As Unitarian Universalists, we seek to embrace the broadest possible definition of what constitutes a family, what constitutes gender identity and role, and recognize that children are being raised in all kinds of environments. So on this special day, we honor those who support children in whatever family situation they are in. And moving on to the focus of this service, the DUC Men's Group recently enjoyed reflecting on the power of sharing stories about our lives with each other. So we decided to share some stories from the pandemic and some songs that fit the theme of pandemic with you today. We hope you will find it interesting and thought-provoking. And now let's sing hymn number 347, with new lyrics. The words will be projected to my right.
Spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
It's time to gather. Today, I have a story that should fit in the Father's Day theme. It is Granddad's Prayer of the Earth by Douglas Woods. When I was little, my granddad was my best friend. Being with him made the world seem just right. Granddad and I liked to go for walks in the woods together. And we didn't walk very far or very fast or very straight. And while we walked, I would ask him questions about things I wasn't sure of. Why is it, Granddad? I would ask. And what if? And does it ever? And one day I asked my granddad about prayers. For a long time, Granddad was quiet. He didn't say anything until we came to the tallest trees in the forest, and then he answered with a question. Did you know, boy, that trees pray? I listened closely, but I couldn't hear them. See how they reach for the sky, he said. They reach and reach for clouds and sun and moon and stars. And what else is reaching for heaven but a prayer? I thought about the trees and kept listening for them, and while I thought, I sat down on an old mossy rock. Rocks pray too, said Granddad. Pebbles and boulders and old weathered hills, they are still and silent, and those are two important ways to pray. I thought hard about the rocks. I picked up a pebble and stuck it in my pocket. We walked a little further and came to a small stream. The water splashed and sparkled, and tiny fish hovered in the shadows. Do streams pray too, Granddad? I asked. Streams pray too, he answered, and lakes and rivers and waters of all kinds. Sometimes they pray silently, like the rocks, and they lie still and calm, reflecting clouds and birds or sunsets or the first evening star. Sometimes they pray with movement, flowing across the face of the earth, giving themselves to the ocean, giving themselves to the sky, and begging their journey all over again. Sometimes waters pray with laughter, chuckling to their friends, the rocks, and sometimes they pray by dancing, leaping into the air and falling back again. These are all ways to pray, said Granddad, but there are more. The tall grass prays as it waves its arms beneath the sky, and flowers pray as they breathe their sweetness into the air. The wind prays as it whispers and moans and sighs. It is saying a prayer and singing a hymn at the same time. A bird prays when it sings the first song of the morning, and it prays in the silent moment just before it sings. And the robin's last song at sundown is an evening prayer. All the beings of the world pray, said my granddad, as they slip through the forest or sparkle in the water, as they climb mountainsides or soar into the clouds or burrow into the earth. Each living thing gives its life to the beauty of all life, and that gift is its prayer. Then we were quiet, my granddad and I. He was watching something far away, and I was thinking about all he had said, about rocks and trees and grass and birds and flowers. Finally, I asked him to tell me about the prayers of people. And Granddad smiled and ruffled my hair. People pray some of the most wonderful prayers of all, he said. And bending down to smell a flower can be a prayer, said my granddad. Quietly watching the sunrise, feeling the slow turning of the earth, and saying hello to a new day is one of the oldest prayers. Standing in a snowy woods on a wintry day and watching your breath become part of the breath of the world is a way to pray. Making music or painting a picture can be a prayer. Holding hands around the table with family and friends, remembering all that holds us together and giving thanks is one of the greatest prayers. Sometimes, said Granddad, people pray when they are sad or sick or lonely or have a problem too big to carry by themselves. And they may say words that they have learned from their fathers or mothers or granddads or great-grandmothers. But often they must find their own words. The important thing to remember is that the words will always be right if they are real and true and come from the heart. We had walked far enough And Granddad said it was time to go back. But I had one last question. Are our prayers answered, Granddad? I asked. And Granddad smiled. Most prayers are not really questions, he said. And if we listen very closely, a prayer is often its own answer. Like the trees and winds and waters, we pray because we are here, not to change the world, but to change ourselves. Because it is when we change ourselves that the world is changed. My granddad and I went for many walks after that one, and I often listened for the prayers of the earth, but was never sure I heard them. Then one day, my granddad was gone, and no matter how hard I prayed, he didn't come back. He couldn't come back. I prayed and prayed and prayed until I couldn't pray anymore. And so I didn't for a long time. And the world seemed dark and lonely without my granddad in it. Until one day, I went for a walk, and I found a big rock under some tall trees and sat down on it. And overhead, the branches swayed, and the breeze whispered in the leaves. I heard the stream flowing nearby, and a robin singing from a honeysuckle bush. And I heard something else too, something in the sound of breezes and birds and water. I heard prayers. The earth was praying, just like my granddad said. So I joined in. Thank you, I prayed, for tall trees and sweet flowers, for still rocks and singing birds, and especially for my granddad. And as I prayed, something changed, and my granddad seemed somehow near. And for the first time in a long time, the world seemed just right.
Good morning. My name is Mike Alborough, and my story from the pandemic is called Exponential Growth. Exponential sounds mathsy, but you don't need any equations to get this. Just realize that anything that doubles and doubles and doubles is growing exponentially. Try this at home if you haven't already. Take the largest sheet of newspaper you can find, fold it once to double its thickness, repeat and repeat, keep going. If you could do 22 folds, its thickness would be about 500 meters, the height of the Empire State Building. That's ridiculous. That's exponential growth. After about 7 folds, you will probably give up. If each person infected with a virus infects 2 others, and if a week later each of those infected 2 others, in 6 months, 67 million people would be infected. In 10 months, it would be the population of the whole world, nearly 8 trillion. That's a pandemic. Check on your calculator, 2 to the power n. That's just maths, not the real world. I had 2 big ifs in there, but cannot both be true. Exponential growth cannot continue indefinitely, but it makes you think. Something has to stop them, and you hope it is not the extinction of mankind, humankind, I should say. The fastest and the slowest growths, exponential growths, we know, or we think we know, are in the physics of the universe. The fastest was the Big Bang itself, according to the theory of inflation, which is the front runner these days. It says that the universe started out a trillion times smaller than a proton, doubling in size every trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second. Did I miss one? After 86 doublings, it was the size of a grapefruit or a baseball. And all good things come to an end, and bad things too. That exponential growth stopped, and it became a hot fireball expanding more slowly. That remarkable event was the Big Bang. Now we seem to be in the slowest growth of all. The whole visible universe may be doubling in size, but with a billion-year doubling time. That's said to be because of dark energy, but nobody knows what that is. Will that eventually stop or go on forever and ever? Amen. Some cosmologists talk about eternal inflation, and eternity is not just a very, very long time, it's infinity, which is very different. A trillion is not nearly infinity, and neither is a quadrillion. Personally, I think that all good things come to an end, and bad things too should apply to the whole universe, which will eventually stop expanding and collapse to a big crunch. But don't worry, it may never happen, at least not for trillions of years, and I'm not a professional cosmologist, and even if I were, you don't have to believe it. While I may be only an amateur cosmologist, I am a professional particle physicist at Fermilab. But because I am not essential, you might even define me as surplus to requirements, they have not let me in for 16 months, except for one time to replace my terminally ill laptop. They let me in on a Saturday morning, well masked. Go in, get it, and get out. Don't see anybody, don't talk to anybody. Okay, I can work fine from home, but I do miss face-to-face discussions. At Blackboard, or rather whiteboard these days, we do not discriminate. So many ideas are born, or grow, or die in those chats. I'm very grateful for the internet, the World Wide Web, and Zoom, but it's not the same thing. All other exponential growths must come to an end. Right now, parts of Australia have a plague of mice. A female mouse, called Minnie Mouse, can have a litter of 6 to 10 baby mice every few weeks. If half are girl mice and they carry on, in 5 months, Minnie Mouse would have thousands of descendants. When they're eating the crops, they're starting to eat each other. It has to stop. Humans are less prolific. Right now, the world population doubling time is about 70 years. It may seem less urgent, but we have to flatten the curve, or in less than 700 years, and time flies, there will be 1,000 people for everyone alive today. We can choose to gently control the population growth, or external forces will do it for us, and not in a good way. Global nuclear warfare, effects of climate change on the biosphere that we may not now foresee, or uncontrollable pandemics come to mind. And this one is not over yet, but thanks to scientists developing vaccines, we may get it under control, unless too many people opt out of this battle and allow it to continue. I don't want to end on such a downer. The pandemic has a lighter side for those of us coming through it without grieving a loss. So, a couple of jokes harvested from the internet. My husband purchased a world map, gave me a dart and said, "Throw this, and wherever it lands, that's where I'm taking you when this pandemic ends." Now we're spending 2 weeks behind the fridge. And I'm not talking to myself, I'm having a parent-teacher conference. And can I get away with this one? If you bought 100 rolls of toilet paper in preparation for 2 weeks of quarantine, you probably should have been seeing a doctor before coronavirus. Thank you. And now we will have a hymn, "In These Hard Times," by our choristers.
In these hard times there will always be singing, always be singing. In these hard times, in these hard times there will always be singing, always be singing. In these hard times, in these hard times there will always be sharing, always be sharing. In these hard times, in these hard times there will always be sharing, always be sharing. In these hard times, in these hard times there will always be caring, always be caring. In these hard times, in these hard times there will always be caring, always be caring. In these hard times.
Carl Miller will now present our reading entitled A Father's Day Prayer.
Good morning. I'm reading a Father's Day prayer by Kirk D. Lodeman Copeland. Let us praise those fathers who have striven to balance the demands of work, marriage, and children with an honest awareness of both joy and sacrifice. Let us praise those fathers who, lacking a good model for a father, have worked to become a good father. Let us praise those fathers who, by their own account, were not always there for their children, but to continue to offer those children, now growing, their love and support. Let us pray for those fathers who have been wounded by the neglect and hostility of their children. Let us praise those fathers who, despite divorce, have remained in their children's lives. Let us praise those fathers whose children are adopted and have love, and whose love and support has offered healing. Let us praise those fathers who, as stepfathers, freely choose the obligation of fatherhood and earned their stepchildren's love and respect. Let us praise those fathers who have lost a child to death and to continue to hold that child in their heart. Let us praise those men who have no children, but to cherish the next generation as if they were their own. Let us praise those men who have fathered us in their roles as mentors and guides.
I am now 75 years old and 85% retired. I love to read. I have more time to read than ever before. I start the day by reading the 3 real newspapers that are thrown onto my driveway every morning. I read the Chicago Tribune for local news and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal for balance. It is just amazing how differently the same event is reported on in those 2 leading national newspapers. During the past year, in addition to living through the COVID pandemic, I have read a lot about it. About a year ago, I realized I was not reacting as most other people were. I was just living my normal, everyday life. Ever wonder why all the stores had signs about masks on their front doors? 28 states have enacted new laws relating to lawsuits arising from a virus-contracted illness. A typical statute reads, and I quote, "There is a rebuttable presumption of an assumption of risk by a plaintiff in an exposure claim when the individual or entity posts and maintains signs in a clearly visible location at the entrance to the premises." So much about caring about you. Back to me. I bought some KN95 medical quality masks. I went into grocery stores and everywhere else I wanted to go that was open for business. I do not want anyone else selecting groceries for me or anything else. And if you think having somebody else select your groceries for you means they might be cleaner, the question is, did they wash and sanitize their hands? No way to know. Agnes and I got vaccinated as soon as we could. We drove down to Springfield twice to get vaccinated about 6 weeks sooner than waiting around in DuPage County. Maybe 6 weeks mattered, maybe it did not. No way to know, but we felt the use of the time had a benefit. Back to my legal point of view. The typical COVID statute provides that, and again I quote, "No individual or entity shall be required to establish a written or published policy addressing the spread of COVID-19 including any policy requiring or mandating vaccination or requiring proof of vaccination." Close quote. I believe it makes sense for everyone to get vaccinated because the risk is slight and the reward is great. However, messenger RNA has never been used in a vaccine in any human body until this year. I understand and accept the fact that many people think that unknown risk is unacceptable and they do not want messenger RNA injected into their bodies. If we believe in individual freedom of choice and conscience, people should be able to choose to not get vaccinated. Going back to the legal point of view, the statutes I read both use the medical term for the virus. The current issue is, as the virus mutates, do these statutes have to be periodically revised to refer to all the variants? Medical science can't even agree on what the virus is. I have been irritated by the social restrictions and lost opportunities to go to concerts and plays and attend services in person in this church. No fears, no upset, just irritation. On the emotional spectrum, just another risk to deal with as I live daily life. Do you think I'm not normal? Several people have told me that, so I've been thinking about it. My answer is that a 40-plus year career as an investment lawyer working for insurance companies has conditioned my thinking about and awareness of risk far differently from most people listening to me right now. I dealt with financial risks every day at the multi-million-dollar level, and my employers were analyzing and pricing risks every day. I worked in an environment where the conversations at lunch were about death, also called life insurance, hurricanes and floods and fires, also called property and casualty insurance, car accidents, and disease, which is called health insurance. Everybody listening to me has one or more of those insurance policies in their drawer back home. So I found this rather interesting to reflect about myself. It seems to me that most educated people live such safe and secure lives that they just do not think about risks in life very much. Therefore, when the pandemic hit, emotional responses of fear and anxiety were a logical and natural response to an unusually acute, real danger in daily living, getting a deadly virus. My point of view is backed up by a fascinating fellow. O. Carter Snead is a law professor at Notre Dame Law School. He is also director of Notre Dame's program on ethics and culture. He is an acknowledged scholarly expert on public bioethics, which examines the interface between the governance of science, medicine, and biotechnology. If you're interested in more, his recently published book is entitled, quote, "What It Means to Be Human, The Case for the Body in Bioethics." I'm not going to quote from the book, but I'm going to quote instead from an interview which was recently published. In the interview, Professor Snead said the following, and I quote, "Physical presence is what governmental authorities snatched from people during the pandemic. Some of those interventions were medically necessary, but the authorities, together with alarmist news media, showed little capacity to weigh costs and risks against benefits. Has the public view of risk tolerance shifted in a dramatic way? Is the point of human life simply to hide away in a bubble wrap contained and containing you so safely that you don't ever encounter any risk? For Professor Mead and for me, the answer is clearly no. Our final homily will now be presented by Robert Sprocki.
Psychologist Erik Erikson talked about the developmental stage for people over 65 as having a healthy balance of ego integrity versus despair. Ego integrity refers to a sense of acceptance, wholeness, few regrets, a feeling at peace, a sense of success. Despair, referring to regrets, shame, disappointment, bitterness, feeling that life was wasted, feeling unproductive, depressed, hopeless. He said we never feel totally accepting or totally regretful, but the point is to work toward a healthy balance, which he says leads to the virtue of wisdom, which is defined as having an informed and detached concern with life itself, even when confronting death itself. I would add one important ingredient to the ego integrity side of the equation, a sense of humor, which leads me to share with you, in honor of Father's Day, a few corny dad, humorous pandemic jokes. Feel free to groan as warranted. Joke number one. After years of wanting to thoroughly declutter my house, but lacking the time, during the pandemic, I discovered that lack of time wasn't the reason. Grown, right? Pandemic day 121 at home, and the dog is looking at me like, see, this is why I chew the furniture. Okay, back to the topic. So did my experience with the pandemic affect my ego integrity versus despair balance? On the ego integrity side, my wife Caroline recently showed me an interview describing the feeling of languishing that many feel during the pandemic, a feeling that I'm wasting time and not accomplishing much. Languishing seems like a good way to describe what I felt during much of the pandemic. To combat this feeling, I joined several online daily meditation groups that helped me to feel calmer, more at peace, and in community. It also helped me to build an awareness of the storying constantly going on in my head, much of which was negative and centered on the losses of the pandemic. Meditation also helped a little to go beyond my stories into a zone of storylessness, a sort of deprogramming from consumer culture and aspects and expectations of travel, live entertainment, and accomplishments. It also helped me face the real possibility of sickness and death from COVID-19. I found a strange comfort in the meditation session's online closing words. May I find liberation in the turbulent waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. This was a sort of a letting go for me of life's expectations, of my wishes for a long life, and for my attachments. Meditation also helped me to practice journaling, to find inspirational readings, and to not other people with different perspectives so much. Instead, trying to show compassion to all. It helped me remember that all of us are in some sense broken and in need of compassion and forgiveness for ourselves and for others. The monthly Soul Matters topic discussions and exercises also helped me feel a sense of accomplishment. I particularly liked the 6-word story exercise a few months ago that we did in our men's group, which, by the way, is an open group. New members welcome. Here are a few 6-word stories with a sort of a haiku feel to them that I wrote a couple months ago. Bright daffodils, saying good morning, waving. Hopping squirrel, playfully inventing zigzag path. I also found myself feeling thankful for the learning opportunities our UU Faith offers. Seminars like the Difficult Conversations webinar offered through the Geneva UU Church helped me feel like I was making good use of my time, alerting me to the dangers of an attitude that values being right over being in relationship. One exercise in particular caught my attention. We graphed our life's ups and downs, traumas and triumphs on a transparency, and then practice conversing with each other through our transparencies. So I would hold up this transparency of ups and downs. It really drove home to me this realization that I'm not objective and rational in my relations with others, but filter everything through my own perceptual lens of experience and memory. On the despair side of the equation, the storming of the Capitol and the murder of George Floyd made me feel like the scales of naivete had fallen from my eyes, and I could catch glimpses of the cultural narratives and systemic oppressions that maintain power and privilege. I could see more clearly the entrenched power interests of privileged racial and ethnic groups, such as white males, institutionalized religion, the captains of industry, the bureaucracy, the military, and the carceral justice system. I felt some regret personally in my life about focusing so much on individual psychological growth and mental health over the years, and probably not enough on systemic change to create a more just society. But on the whole, I'd have to say that my balance of ego integrity versus despair has fortunately remained healthy and is improving as the pandemic restrictions are being loosened. I'd like to close with a few more corny dad pandemic jokes. Again, feel free to groan. Number one, what's the best way to avoid touching your face and spreading germs? A glass of wine in each hand. What did the astronauts say to NASA when they notified them that their mission was complete and they could return to Earth? Thanks, but no thanks. So many coronavirus jokes out there. It's a pun-demic. Thank you.
It is Father's Day. My father died 21 years ago. I was raised in the Roman Catholic Church. Each family got a box of dated envelopes to put their weekly donations in. And I can clearly remember my father making a big deal out of turning in his envelope. Here at DUUC, we have a much better way. We will now commence our virtual offering. What you have heard during our service today reflects what we talk about in our men's group meetings. If you are interested in what you heard, come to a meeting.